Alright, so today we're going to talk about the other very important biochemical process we have to know in Year 12 biology, which is the process of cellular respiration, which we are very familiar with because of Year 11 biology. Alright, so here we've got a chloroplast and a mitochondria. What's the difference between the two? Chloroplasts, they're going to use light energy to make glucose. Nice, lovely organelle. Mitochondria, on the other hand, the tough guys, they're going to break down the glucose and make ATP. Okay, so these are the process we're going to talk about today, is cellular respiration. Pause the video here and have a go at the 3 quick questions. So hopefully for the first question you recognize that we want to explain what is chlorophyll and why the data in this cartoon is so wrong. So first let's explain what chlorophyll is. It is a pigment which absorbs light energy. Right? That's all it is, and it's present in the chloroplast, right? So the cartoon says, "Dad, why do leaves change color?" And the dad says, "Mother Nature sends a gentle breeze to tell them it's time to sleep." And the kid says, "Nothing to do with chlorophyll, huh?" So hopefully you recognize that chlorophyll is green. So what happens to plants that lose their leaves in the winter is actually they lose that green pigment, so it just breaks down in the winter, and due to that breakdown the leaves themselves actually lose their color and they actually eventually die and fall off. Okay, so where is RNA polymerase found in the cell and what is its function? RNA polymerase is found in the nucleus and its function is it's used to copy DNA to create mRNA molecule. Cool. Last question. Facilitated diffusion requires a cell to expend ATP. No, it doesn't. It does not require ATP. Requires the presence of a membrane protein. Ooh, yes it does. It does require a membrane protein. Let's have a look. Moves molecules against the concentration gradient. No, it doesn't. Moves with the concentration gradient. Is the movement of lipid-soluble molecules across the cell membrane? No, that would be simple diffusion, so we have to go with B. Alright, so in the study design, we're on to the very last dot point of Area Study 1, and we're looking at cellular respiration, and particularly we're talking about the purpose of cellular respiration, these organelles that we know about mitochondria is the site of aerobic cellular respiration, and an overview of their structure and evidence of their bacterial origins. All information really we have looked at in the past. So sometimes cells actually do need energy. Such as if we're building complex molecules like these proteins, look at them, nice and pretty. Through the process of active transport, we need energy. If a whole cell, some cells are able to move like this, that actually requires energy for this paramecium. The movement of cell organelles, so inside of cells, so this is a cytoskeleton, and this is some kind of organelle, more specifically that's probably the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and we have this little special protein that walks along the cell on the cytoskeleton, and it requires energy to do that. Transmission of nerve impulses, so actually thinking requires energy. And cell division and cell growth requires energy. So sometimes the cell needs energy. So let's look at the purpose of cellular respiration. It really is to get this glucose that we have, that we get from food. This glucose is full of chemical energy, but we can't actually just grab this energy and just use it. Okay, we have to use this process of cellular respiration to break down this glucose and turn it into ATP. Yeah, because we're able to use ATP. So there's 2 actual ways we can break down glucose in our bodies. Right, the first way is the fast way. It's called anaerobic, so without oxygen cellular respiration, and it just involves breaking down this glucose molecules really quickly. It really just breaks it down once, right? This happens outside of the mitochondria, and it gets us about 2 ATP molecules. Okay. Aerobic cellular respiration, on the other hand, the cellular respiration that requires oxygen, all right, it involves breaking down glucose very slowly, involving lots and lots of breakdowns of glucose. It happens mostly inside of the mitochondria, all right, and we get about 36, 38 molecules of ATP. This number is very contested, and it's not a number you have to know anymore, but it pretty much, you just have to know that we get over 30 molecules of ATP, heaps more than anaerobic respiration. Both of these processes begin with glycolysis. Okay, that is the first step of any kind of cellular respiration. Okay, here's the two equations for cellular respiration. All right, I highly recommend you know the aerobic pathway, which is this first one, quite well. You'll notice that it's actually essentially a flipped version of photosynthesis nearly, but we have this glucose molecule, C6H12O6. We get 6 oxygen molecules, lots and lots of different steps there. There's 3 as a whole. We get carbon dioxide being produced, and we get water being produced, and a bunch of usable energy in form of ATP. Anaerobic cellular respiration happens very similarly, just instead of getting this whole big breakdown, we're just going to get lactic acid and 2 ATP being formed if we're talking about humans. If we're talking about plants, we're going to get the same thing, just instead of 2 lactic acid and ATP, we're going to get 2 ethanol and 2 carbon dioxides and 2 ATP. Okay, that's just the difference of fermentation, what we call lactic acid and alcoholic fermentation. Okay, so let's have a look at these mitochondria again. So here we have a couple of electron micrograph images of mitochondria, pretty cool. So the mitochondria, you should know, is a membrane-bound organelle. And it actually has 2 membranes. It has the outer membrane and the inner membrane, just like a chloroplast. Okay, inside of the mitochondria, that inner membrane, it folds in and out and in and out, and each time it does that, it forms what we call a cristae. Okay, the cytoplasm, if you have it, of the mitochondria, so that fluid that's inside the mitochondria, is called the matrix. Okay, and then we've also got in mitochondria, just like chloroplast did, we have some DNA and we have some ribosomes, which means it can make its own proteins. Cool. All right, so some of this information can actually lead to give us some more information about the evidence of the bacterial origins of the mitochondria. Okay, so this works just like the evidence of bacterial origins for the chloroplast. All right, we know that we think that they have a bacterial origin because of, one, their size, but more importantly, they have an outer membrane, which we think is the original membrane of the old eukaryotic cell that engulfed the bacterial mitochondria. It has an inner membrane, which is the original membrane of the bacteria that used to be that mitochondria. All right, and then it also has its own DNA and ribosomes to produce proteins. They're probably the biggest pieces of evidence. Another interesting thing to think, though, is that we actually think that mitochondria were taken up by a eukaryotic cell before the chloroplasts. All right, and the reason for this is because we actually today we have cells like my cell and your cells that only have mitochondria. On the other hand, plant cells like this have both mitochondria and chloroplasts. All right, and this would indicate that at some stage an ancestor of ours took up the mitochondria. All right, and then that ancestor split into cells that later became things like animal cells and fungi. All right, and then it also split into a cell that later on took up chloroplasts. All right, and then that cell later on became cells that became plants. Cool. So that's just something interesting to a way that it breaks down when the mitochondria were taken up and when the chloroplasts were taken up. Okay. Regardless, what you really have to know about the mitochondria, though, is that they are now going to be the site of aerobic respiration, which we're going to talk about more next time.